This folding e-bike is the electric C-Line from Brompton. We tested the 12-speed Explorer model and found that it's simply one of the most practical folding e-bikes we've reviewed, especially for those who live in densely populated cities. Brompton has been making folding bikes since 1975, so what advantages do 50 years of manufacturing provide? Let's take a ride and find out. Welcome to Electric Bike Report. My name's John and I'll be your host for this review. Before we blast on into the Brompton, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel, especially if you're shopping for an e-bike. We subject every e-bike we review to a series of standardized performance tests that we use for comparison purposes. So when you watch our reviews, you're getting objective data instead of paid opinions, and we want to be your go-to source for research and information. All of that testing takes a lot of time and effort though, so if you decide to pick up one of these bikes for yourself, please help to support our work by using our affiliate link down in the video description when you do. Now, let's start things off with a few highlights that stood out to us in our testing of this bike. First things first, let's talk about what makes Brompton the generally accepted gold standard when it comes to folding bikes. Especially here in the US, most folding bikes aren't actually all that small once they're folded, and they often weigh 60 to 70 pounds, so they take up a fair amount of space and they're not super easy to move around. The electric C-Line Explorer, on the other hand, weighs an extremely manageable 38 pounds with its battery installed, and it weighs only 32 pounds when that's removed, so it's extremely easy to lift. On top of that, Brompton engineered this bike so that it folds in a really unique way, so it becomes super compact. I'll walk you through that process later, but it can actually roll once it's folded, and it can even be loaded into an optional hard-shell travel case if you want to check it on an airplane. Next, let's talk about the feel and specs of the bike's motor. The electric C-Line has a 250-watt front hub motor with a torque sensor, so it's able to adapt the amount of power it puts out to match how hard you pedal. If you want to go faster, just push a bit harder, and if you want to ride slower, just relax on the pedals, just like a regular non-electric bike. This bike's motor is helpful, but it's not overpowering, so if you like pedaling actively, you should definitely like how the C-Line feels. I also want to highlight Brompton's awesome warranty. So their frames, electric components, and non-wearing components are covered against manufacturing and material defects for 2 years. If you register your bike though, you can extend the warranty on the frame to 7 years and the coverage on the electrical components for 3 years, so that just seems like a no-brainer. Finally, I want to mention that all Brompton bikes are made by hand in the company's factory in London, which is just not something we come across too often. Brompton prides itself on the competency of its technicians, and the company's workers even add their initials to each bike they fabricate. To keep things moving, let's run through the electric C-Line specs and components, most of which are custom and proprietary. The bike is powered by a 36-volt, 300 watt-hour battery that's built right into a small storage bag that mounts to the front of the bike, and that also includes a control panel with lights to indicate the charge level, a USB port for charging your phone or other devices, and buttons to turn the bike on and off, activate or deactivate the integrated headlight and taillight, and finally switch between 3 levels of pedal assist. The bike's drivetrain is a bit different, at least on the 12-speed Explorer model that we tested. Our bike has a 3x4 drivetrain with a single 50-tooth chainring paired with a 4-speed cassette and derailleur and a 3-speed internal gear hub made by Sturmey Archer. This gives this model of the bike a 402% gear range, but there's also a simpler, lower-priced 4-speed urban model that doesn't have the gear hub. Both models of the electric C-Line ride on 16-inch by 1.35-inch or 349 by 35C Schwalbe Marathon street tires, which were designed specifically for Brompton bikes. Both wheels have mechanical rim brakes with dual pivot calipers and plastic fenders with mud guards. The bike's saddle is custom. It includes a handle to assist with lifting or moving the bike, and it's mounted to a super long seat post, but we'll talk a bit more about that later in the ride quality section. Up in the cockpit, there's a set of 515mm low-rise handlebars mounted on one of 2 stem options called either mid or high. We have the mid option. The handlebars have locking rubber grips. There's a shifter for the gear hub on the right handlebar along with a bell, and then a second shifter on the left for the derailleur. To wrap things up, the electric C-Line is a Class 1 e-bike with pedal assist up to 15.5 miles per hour. It has a total payload capacity of 242.5 pounds. It comes with a tiny hand-operated Lazine air pump that mounts to the left seat stay, and it's available in a pretty incredible 8 color options. This one is called Yuzu Lime, but there's also black, black lacquer, matcha green, dune sand, ocean blue, flame lacquer, and finally racing green. With all those things covered, let's go see how the electric C-Line folds. Like most folding e-bikes, the electric C-Line has a hinged frame and a collapsible stem, but also, like I said earlier, Brompton engineered this bike quite a bit differently. I'm gonna walk and talk you through the folding process, and then I've got a few extra details to add once we're done. So to start things off, I will pop off the battery. There's a button on the handle for that, so you can just set that down. Next thing is going to be swinging the rear wheel under the bike. So there's a release lever here, and then you just can kind of whip that under. Third is the frame itself. So there's a twist knob that releases a clamp, and then you can kind of just lift, swing that back, and there's a hook on the front axle that attaches to the chainstay on that. Finally, we have the collapsible stem here, so we'll release that. There's a bolt on the stem that has a little plastic piece that actually clips into place on the fork, so you could hear that. And then at this point, you can actually roll the bike back and forth if you want, so that'll help you get it on the subway. But then you can actually fold up one of the pedals on this side of the bike and bring the saddle down as well. So at this point, super easy to lift and carry. Again, 32 pounds. That's about all she wrote. And then I'll go ahead and show you how to set the bike back up once it's folded down. So basically just everything in reverse. We will get the saddle in place, pop the stem back up and tighten that down. Swing the front of the bike back around in place and attach that clamp. And then, well, actually, if the bike doesn't include a kickstand, so if you want to keep it in place, you can just swing the wheel under and kind of walk away from it if you need to keep it stationary. But yeah, to get that back into place, you can kind of do this little whip and it clicks back in, pop your battery on, and you are good to go. So I found that there's definitely a bit of a learning curve to folding this bike. Although I absolutely love how compact it gets and how easy it is to move around once it's folded. I also like that there's a little diagram of the basic steps in a few different places, like the control panel, the cranks, the motor, and the brake levers, just to kind of help you out in case you forget something. I do recommend getting a little practice when you first get the bike. Once it's all collapsed down, it measures roughly 25 inches long by 11 inches wide by 25 inches tall. So with the battery removed, as you saw, I found it very easy to lift in case you need to go up a flight of stairs. And overall, I feel like it's just worth mentioning how amazing it is to see a functional e-bike collapse down to that small of a package. The engineering here is pretty remarkable, and I think it says a lot about why Brompton has been making bikes for 50 years. In any case though, let's keep things moving and see how this bike performed in our series of standardized performance tests. Starting off with our brake test, we tested the electric C-Line stopping power by pedaling the bike up to its maximum speed of around 16 miles per hour before applying the brakes and measuring the distance it took to come to a complete stop. The average after 3 of these tests was 19 feet and 9 inches, which is generally a great result, but there are a few details to dive into here. First, I want to talk a bit about some big differences between this bike and most of the other folding e-bikes we've tested. In most cases, those bikes used either hydraulic or mechanical disc brake systems, while the electric C-Line uses rim brakes that work a lot differently. Additionally, nearly all of those other bikes shipped with a 20 mile per hour speed limit, which is where we usually pedal or throttle up to before hitting the brakes in this test, but of course we weren't able to do that with this bike. Both of these differences made comparison pretty difficult. First, because disc brakes of both varieties typically have better stopping power than rim brakes, and second, because bikes that travel faster typically take longer to slow down. To try to split the difference, I'll still give you the numbers comparing the C-Line with other folding bikes that used mechanical disc brake systems, since those are theoretically between rim brakes and hydraulic disc brakes in terms of performance. Those other bikes averaged 22 feet and 4 inches, making the Brompton's result 2 feet and 5 inches shorter than average. Of course, we have the difference in speed to account for, but generally speaking, any result in that range is excellent. In my time on the bike, I did find that these brakes did the job pretty well, although they took a bit more time to slow me down than what I'm used to when dealing with disc brake systems, and I had to clamp down a bit harder than I'm used to. Do keep in mind that this type of brake system tends to suffer a bit in the rain as well, so I recommend giving yourself a little extra distance when you're slowing down. Overall, we do think the electric C-Line is spec'd appropriately, and the rim brake system makes sense on a bike that's designed to be compact and lightweight, but do be aware that this brake system does make some compromises. For our speed test, I took the electric C-Line out to our local shared use paths and rode in each of its 3 pedal assist settings to get an idea of its power distribution. Let's go see how the test went, and then we can analyze the results back here in the studio. All right, we are here for a speed test on the Brompton electric C-Line. So start things off without pedal assist, and you'll notice that I'm using an app here that's a little bit different than usual. So I'm actually using the Brompton electric app that includes a speedometer and then also a different way of, or an easier way I should say, of adjusting the pedal assist level. So otherwise I'd have to kind of reach over here and hit the button on the battery up there. So as it is, let's see, we are going kind of right around 11 miles per hour with no pedal assist. So let's go ahead and go up to PAS 1. All right, so I think you can probably hear that motor engage. Definitely, took the edge off of the pedaling, able to shift up and get a little bit faster speeds here. So we are landing kind of right around 13 miles per hour with that same level of effort. Trying to keep the pressure applied to the pedals the same. So I guess between 12 and a half and 13 miles an hour. Let's go ahead and go up to PAS 2. So there are 3 levels of pedal assist. Whoa, I don't know if you saw that, but that gave me a little bit of a kick when we got up there. So I'll shift up here and all right, we are at 16 miles per hour, which should be about the top speed of the bike, but I mean, feels pretty zippy. The ride's very easy. Yeah, feels really nice here. So 16 miles an hour, maybe a little above depending, but let's go ahead and go up to PAS 3. And I wouldn't expect that our speed will change a whole lot here. I am gonna shift a little bit, so once on the hub gear and then drop back down on the cassette. Yeah, I mean, sticking kind of right in that same range, maybe 16 and a half miles per hour or so. But okay, we will call that our speed test on the electric C-Line. To go over those numbers one more time, I started off with just my own leg power at 11.3 miles per hour, then stepped up to 12.7 in the lowest level of pedal assist, 16 miles per hour in the second, and 16.4 miles per hour in the third. Now, I do want to reiterate that the bike's maximum pedal-assisted speed is 15.5 miles per hour, but pedaling above that speed happened very naturally with it being so lightweight, and its 250 watt motor being relatively low in power output, so I wasn't really pushing to go faster. If we graph the data from my test, this shows us the electric C-Line's speed profile. We usually prefer to see consistent increases in speed between pedal assist levels, but at least on flat ground, PAS 2 had enough power to reach the bike's top speed, so there wasn't really a measurable difference between PAS 2 and 3 in this test, even though pedaling in PAS 3 was easier and picked up quicker in acceleration. Overall, I think the bike's power distribution is good, mostly because it keeps things really simple. Essentially, the pedal assist system gives you both a low and a mid-power setting for flat ground, and then a more powerful assist mode for going over hills or enjoying the easiest possible ride. I found myself splitting my time mostly between PAS 1 and 2, depending on where I was riding and how natural I wanted the ride to feel, but regardless of the power level, it felt very responsive and easy. So I do want to acknowledge that 15.5 miles per hour is probably going to be plenty if you live in a dense city like New York, but riders in more suburban areas in the US might prefer something that can move a bit faster. We wouldn't mind seeing a full Class 1 model from Brompton that can reach 20 miles per hour, or even a Class 2 bike with a throttle, but at least for now, the company's e-bikes are a bit more limited. That said, I think the C-Line did a solid job in this test for what it is, so let's keep things moving and see how it did when we tested its range. We tested the electric C-Line in 2 separate range tests. We rode in PAS3 and PAS1 until the battery ran out of charge to find the bike's minimum and maximum range. Brompton advertises a range of 20 to 45 miles, which our testing supported. We ended up riding 19.3 miles in PAS3 and 52.1 miles in PAS1. For comparison, I looked at similar folding bikes we've tested with 250 and 300 watt hub motors, and those averaged 23 and 36 miles in their highest and lowest pedal assist levels. That puts the Brompton about 4 miles below average in its PAS3 test, but about 16 miles above average in its PAS1 test, so let's break that down a little. Most of the other bikes I'm using for comparison had cadence sensors, so their motors were always putting out a constant flow of power. The electric C-Line's motor output can vary because of its torque sensor, as I mentioned earlier, so that's likely why the Brompton did so well in its PAS1 test. The C-Line's PAS3 results are probably within the margin of error, so it's fair to say that it's still right around average when we're looking at that portion of the test, but it is worth acknowledging that its battery capacity is somewhat on the smaller side at 300 watt hours versus the average of 351 watt hours. So it had a bit less gas in the tank than many of its peers to begin with. Regardless, our testing shows that this bike has great range for its specs. We think most riders are likely to use it for short trips between the subway or bus station and the office, but if you're looking to spend your entire commute on 2 wheels, this bike has what it takes. And to touch back on what I said in the speed test section, PAS1 or 2 seem plenty powerful for flatter areas, so if you stick with those low or mid power levels, you should be able to stretch out your range. Either way, the battery only takes about 4 hours to recharge, and you can plug it in either on or off the bike, so it shouldn't take long before you can get back out there. Finally, we tested the electric C-Line Explorer in our hill test at a location called Hellhole Trail, which is a paved path with a 12% average grade that's a third of a mile entirely uphill. I'll pass you over to our test rider, Justin, for a few minutes so you can see how the test went and get some of his thoughts along the way, but I'll see you back here later to go over the results.
All right, we are out here on a bike that I've been wanting to test for a long time. That's the Brompton C-Line. Now this is a front hub motor, and really curious to see how it does. So far it feels pretty good. More peppy than I expected. Don't have a speedometer on me. There's no display, so I can't necessarily tell you how fast I'm going. As far as like pedaling goes, I'd say I have to pedal a little bit more than the kind of a normal for a hub motor. Again, teeny tiny bike, smaller motor. It's kind of what I was expecting from it. Overall, fairly quiet, incredibly quiet. I'll let you listen here through this next section as you pass these animals here. Oh. How's it going? Hey, Pooch. So yeah, not even sure if you'll be able to hear that much at all. There is a little bit of a whine to it, but overall very quiet, very controlled. You can probably hear me breathing a little bit more. Kind of feels like I'm putting in about the effort that I usually do on like a mid-drive bike. It's chilly today, so that makes it harder to breathe as well. But to be honest, I was not expecting this bike to make it up the hill very easily, and it's easier than I expected. So kudos to the Brompton for that, and we'll go check the tape and see how it did.
I'll second what Justin said. I was very impressed with how well this bike did, both at Hellhole and on other hills. And as you could see, he did have to pedal fairly actively, but he wasn't working so hard that he couldn't talk or breathe along the way. Justin finished the test in 1 minute and 52 seconds and had an average speed of 9.7 miles per hour. So the electric C-Line came in right about average when compared with other bikes we've tested with 250 watt hub motors. Those bikes averaged 1 minute and 55 seconds, so technically the Brompton was a bit faster, but the difference is well within the margin of error. Now, we don't know the peak wattage or torque output of this bike's motor, but with its results lining up so well with the average, it's definitely doing what it needs to do. Hellhole isn't a hill that you'd want to pedal up without a motor. I've tried it and it's not something I ever really want to do again. So the simple fact that Justin was able to reach the top without being exhausted and completely out of breath just goes to show how much of a difference even a 250 watt motor can make. As we've discussed, using the C-Line's highest power level will use up battery charge faster, and I found PAS2 had plenty of power for average-sized hills, but if you need a little extra power for a tough one, PAS3 definitely has you covered. Ride quality is an umbrella term that basically describes how a bike feels to ride. There are a ton of factors that play into that, things like fit, comfort, handling, responsiveness, and the user interface, among others. So let's head back out on the bike paths and talk about some of the major elements, and then we can go a little bit deeper once we get back here. All right, let's talk about ride quality here on the Brompton electric C-Line. So this is, first and foremost a folding city bike, but you know what, we're doing pretty well out here in the desert as well. So in any case, the bike fits a pretty wide range of riders from 4'7" all the way up to 6'8", and that's dependent on how you get it set up. Brompton offers 3 different seat posts and 2 stem and handlebar configurations, depending on how tall you are. So we kind of have the standard setup with the standard seat post and the mid-level stem and handlebar, which overall feels pretty good. I have very good leg extension. I'm 5'11", but I will say that just personally, I think I'd probably prefer the taller stem and handlebar configuration. There's a moderate forward lean on the current setup here, which I don't really mind. It is comfortable, but just personally probably prefer something a little bit more upright. But moving on, we have a rigid fork up front, so there's no suspension on this bike. You definitely feel the bumps a little bit. I'd say kind of rolling over these cracks in the pavement feels pretty good, but larger bumps and dips you will feel a little bit, so that's just something to keep in mind. You don't get a whole lot of cushion from the tires. Those are pretty small and narrow. They are made by Schwalbe. They're 349 by 35C, but that size, about 16-inch wheels, so that makes the bike really nimble, and then also gives you a pretty quick acceleration. And again, just great maneuverability there. So we also have a 250 watt proprietary front hub motor with a torque sensor, so that allows the power output to fluctuate depending on how hard you pedal. Feels very good. There is a bit of a slower speed limit on this bike than we're typically used to here in the US, as we've talked about a little bit, but overall I think the bike feels pretty peppy and responsive. So overall, yeah, feel like Brompton did a good job with this. And let's bounce back to the studio and kind of wrap things up. So there's no getting around the fact that Brompton bikes are a bit unusual looking, and I definitely expected to feel like a circus bear on a miniature bicycle when riding this thing, but I have to say it was not what I was expecting. Sure, there's definitely an element of that, but overall, the electric C-Line Explorer felt surprisingly well dialed in and functional, and I think that's evidence of Brompton's 50 years of experience. To get a bit more specific on the rider height ranges, Brompton lists some recommended inside leg measurements for their 3 seat post options. The standard seat post on our test bike is recommended for those with a measurement of 26 to 33 inches, while the extended seat post is for riders with an inside leg measurement of 26 to 35 inches, and the telescopic seat post is meant for the widest range of riders with measurements of 26 to 39 inches. I mentioned how the ride was pretty comfortable despite the lack of any suspension, and I want to point out that the frame helps a bit with that. It's made of steel instead of aluminum, which is typically more rigid, so it's able to flex a little and absorb some bumps and vibrations from the road. In terms of handling, the electric C-Line is overall very nimble, but with most of its weight on the front end, it felt a bit slower in its steering than I anticipated based on the bike's 515mm handlebars, which are definitely on the narrow side. The weight seemed to mostly counteract the twitchy feel that usually comes with narrow handlebars, so this was another area where I think the bike felt much better than I expected. Back in the speed test section, you got a little glimpse of the Brompton Electric app. It's pretty simple and straightforward, so I'm not going to walk you through it, but I do want to touch back on it. I liked how the app looked, and I think it made switching pedal assist levels easier while riding than using the buttons on the C-Line's battery, but I still wasn't the biggest fan of having to remove a hand from the handlebars. I encourage Brompton to include a handlebar-mounted button panel in the future, or at least offer one that could be purchased and added separately if you find yourself in agreement with me. I also want to talk a bit about the shifting, as the 12-speed version's 3x4 drivetrain could feel like a lot to manage for someone more used to 1x drivetrains. I got the hang of things pretty quickly, but I spent most of my time straddling the first and second hub gear, so I did feel like I was shifting pretty often. If you're looking for something simpler, you may want to consider the 4-speed urban model without the gear hub. Overall, I really liked how this bike felt to ride though. I'm still kind of blown away by the engineering and how well it all came together. It was comfortable and easy and extremely functional, so I think Brompton did a great job in the ride quality department. I've been hearing about Brompton bikes since my early days with the team here at Electric Bike Report, and I always hoped I'd get my hands on one. I've got to say I'm not disappointed. It's clear to me that this company has found its own niche in both the analog and e-bike worlds, and while I don't think their products are likely to satisfy everyone, I do think the brand absolutely nails what they're trying to do. Not only did this bike perform well, but it's without a doubt the most compact folding e-bike we've tested, at least at the time of filming. Looking back over our test results, it did a great job in our range test, and it also absolutely checked the boxes we hoped it would check in our brake, speed, and hill tests. One thing we haven't talked about yet is price, and the 12-speed model of the electric C-Line Explorer is priced between $4,000 and $4,500, which definitely puts it in the premium tier of e-bikes. That may sound a bit steep, but it is worth remembering that this bike is made by hand in England, and it's loaded with custom components and proprietary tech you won't find elsewhere, so you do get what you pay for. I had a great time testing this bike, and I think it's safe to say that I'm on Team Brompton. I do encourage the brand to offer a full Class 1 or even a Class 2 model in the future, and I think handlebar-mounted controls would be more user-friendly. Otherwise, if you're looking for a lightweight, ultra-compact, and extremely practical folding e-bike, and you don't mind the premium cost, this is definitely the bike for you. If you want to take a closer look at this or other Brompton models, please check out the link to Brompton's website down in the video description. There's another link there to our written review at electricbikereport.com. As always, please be sure to use our affiliate link if you decide to make a purchase, and don't forget to give us a like and let us know what you think of this bike down in the comments section. But thanks for taking a ride with me today. Again, I'm John with Electric Bike Report, and this is the Brompton Electric C-Line Explorer.